Hey everyone, welcome back. Today, we're going deep, like deep into a sector that's both fascinating and honestly crucial to India's economy, the sugar industry. We've got a whole stack of reports and analyses, and trust me, it's way more complex than just, grabbing a spoonful of sugar for your chai.
It really is. What's fascinating to me is how this industry, it's just so intertwined with so many other things. We're talking about ethanol, global markets, and of course, government policies. All these things, they're all playing a role.
It's like a domino effect, right? One thing just bumps into another, and then it all ripples through the system. Okay, so let's start with the big picture, the overall outlook. What are these reports saying? It seems like a bit of a mixed bag for the industry, right?
Yeah, it's a mixed picture for sure. If we look at the recent quarter, Q2 of FY 2025, well, a lot of sugar companies actually faced some, pretty significant challenges. They saw lower profits, and ethanol production also took a dip, which is a key revenue stream for a lot of these companies.
Yeah, that makes sense, especially with all the news about that, like unexpected government ban on using certain sugarcane byproducts for ethanol. That must have really messed things up.
Absolutely. That policy shift back in December 2023, it really limited the options for distilleries. Many of them rely on sugarcane juice and B-heavy molasses for ethanol production, and then suddenly those options were just gone. And on top of that, they were dealing with increased costs for things like sugarcane and maize, plus all the usual off-season expenses. It was a tough spot to be in.
It's like they were getting hit from all sides. And then you've got Mother Nature in the mix, too. Some reports are talking about lower sugarcane yields because of a weaker monsoon in 2023. I even read about something called, was it red rot disease? Yeah, red rot disease impacting the crop. What is that exactly?
So red rot disease, it's a fungal infection that can really damage sugarcane crops. It affects the yield and the sugar content, so it's a big concern for the industry. And with that weaker monsoon impacting growth, it's not surprising that some companies really struggled.
Sounds like a perfect storm of challenges. But the reports also suggest that the outlook for the new sugar season, starting in 2024-25, that's looking a bit more promising, right? So what's driving this optimism?
Well, there are a few things contributing to the positive outlook. First off, the monsoon this year has been much better, which means more sugarcane. That's a huge relief after all the difficulties faced last season.
Okay, so better sugarcane crops mean more sugar production and potentially higher profits for these companies. That's good news.
Yes, definitely. And there's also a lot of anticipation around potential government support. There's talk of an increase in the minimum support price, or MSP, for sugar, which would guarantee a decent price for producers. Plus, there's a chance the government will grant permissions for sugar exports, which would open up more opportunities for Indian producers on the global stage.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. But we can't forget about global sugar prices. The reports mention how those prices are impacting Indian export prospects, too.
Oh, absolutely. We can't ignore the global context here. International sugar prices have been fluctuating, influenced by a lot of factors. One key factor has been those production issues in Brazil, which is a major sugar-producing country. And, well, these issues have driven up global prices.
The reports even gave some specific numbers, like around 21 US cents per pound, which is roughly 40 to 40.5 rupees per kilogram. Those fluctuations must create a lot of uncertainty for Indian companies that are, trying to export their sugar.
Exactly. If global prices go down, it becomes much harder for Indian producers to compete in the international market. So they have to be really strategic to stay competitive and profitable.
It's like this delicate balance, right? You've got domestic factors like government policies and sugarcane yields, and then you've got this unpredictable global market. It's a tough equation.
Yeah, it's a dynamic industry, always adapting to these internal and external pressures. And speaking of dynamics, we can't overlook the impact of that push for ethanol blending in India.
Oh, right. The government's target of achieving 20% ethanol blending with petrol by 2025, that's a big deal. The reports highlight how that initiative is really creating growth potential for the ethanol sector.
It's a major driver of demand for ethanol, for sure. And this increased demand, well, it's pushing companies to increase their ethanol production capacities. It's not just about sugar anymore, it's about finding that sweet spot where both sugar and ethanol production contribute to profits.
So for this ethanol supply year, which runs from November to October, what was the target for ethanol blending?
The goal was to blend about 9.7 billion liters of ethanol. But from what the reports say, oil marketing companies have only floated tenders for around 8.37 billion liters so far.
Whoa, that's still a ton of ethanol. But it sounds like there's still some work to do to reach that 20% blending target. The reports even break down how much ethanol is allocated from different sources, like sugarcane juice and molasses. It seems like a pretty complicated system.
Oh, it is. And remember, those government policies we discussed earlier, the ones that dictate which feedstocks can be used for ethanol production, those have a massive impact on distillery profitability. That ban on using juice and B-heavy molasses really hit those distilleries hard.
Now that the ban's been lifted, I imagine companies are expecting much better performance from their distilleries this coming season.
For sure. And there's also talk that the government might increase ethanol prices, maybe in the range of 4% to 6%. These factors, along with the higher demand, are making the ethanol side of the business a major focus for a lot of sugar companies.
It's amazing how all these different pieces of the puzzle fit together. You've got sugar prices, ethanol production, government policies, the global market. It's a lot to keep track of.
It is. It is. But that's what makes these deep dives so interesting. And to really understand how all these factors play out in the real world, let's focus on some specific companies that caught my eye in these reports. They offer some great examples of how individual companies are navigating this landscape.
Ooh, yeah. I love getting into the details. Which company stood out to you?
Well, one company that's particularly interesting is BALRAMCHIN. Despite the overall mixed outlook for the industry, they're actually quite optimistic about the upcoming sugar season.
What's making them so confident? It seems like a lot of other companies are facing challenges.
A couple of things are working in their favor. First, they've invested in increasing their crushing capacity, which means they can process more sugarcane. And second, they're banking on favorable sugar and ethanol prices in the coming season. They seem to be in a good position to take advantage of the expected market conditions.
Interesting. So they're betting on higher production and good pricing. But is there anything else contributing to their optimistic outlook?
Yes, actually. They've been investing in new, higher-yielding sugarcane varieties. These new varieties could really boost their sugar production. And get this, they're even venturing into some innovative projects like producing polylactic acid or PLA from sugarcane.
PLA, I'm not familiar with that. What is it?
So PLA is a bioplastic. It's biodegradable, so it's a good alternative to traditional plastics. And BALRAMCHIN is looking at ways to produce it from sugarcane, which is a pretty cool example of, diversifying and adding value beyond just making sugar.
That's incredible. They're looking at increasing efficiency in their core business and exploring new avenues for growth. That's a smart move.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what about other companies? Any others stand out to you?
Yeah, another one that caught my eye was DALMIASUG Sugar. They had a tougher recent quarter, but they're also expecting things to improve. They've got a couple of key initiatives in place. One is they've implemented crop protection measures to combat those pest issues we discussed earlier. And they're expecting higher ethanol production to help their bottom line. What's really interesting about DALMIASUG Sugar is their focus on diversifying their sugarcane varieties.
Diversifying. What's the benefit of that?
Well, remember that red rut disease we talked about. It can be devastating to crops, so by planting a mix of varieties, they're reducing their risk. If one variety is susceptible to the disease, the others might be more resistant, which would minimize potential losses. It's a proactive approach to risk management.
Smart move. Spreading the risk seems to be a recurring theme in this industry. Are there any other companies doing something similar?
Definitely. TRIVENI Engineering is another one. They're pretty confident about increased ethanol production and profits in the coming season, but they're also reducing their reliance on a single sugarcane variety. They've been heavily reliant on one called Co0238, but now they're diversifying their plantings to, again, reduce those potential risks that come with relying on just one type.
It's fascinating how these companies are learning from past challenges and adapting their strategies. I'm starting to really appreciate how much goes into bringing that simple spoonful of sugar to our tables.
It's definitely a journey with a lot of twists and turns, and honestly, we've only just scratched the surface. We haven't even touched on those specific challenges faced by some companies in certain regions.
You're right. The reports did mention some problems for companies in Tamil Nadu, specifically eidparry. I'm curious to hear more about those challenges and how they fit into the bigger picture.
All right, then let's dive a bit deeper into those specific company stories and see what lessons we can learn from them.
I'm ready. Let's go.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about some of the regional challenges that popped up in these reports. One that really stood out to me was the situation in Tamil Nadu. The reports, well, they don't paint a very pretty picture for the sugar companies that are operating there.
Yeah, eidparry, that name came up a few times. What exactly were they dealing with?
So eidparry and actually a few other companies in Tamil Nadu, they got hit pretty hard by, well, a bunch of different things, really. They saw much lower sugarcane yields, and the recoveries were down too, which of course directly impacted their sugar production.
So less sugar cane obviously means less sugar, right? And lower recoveries mean they weren't getting as much sugar out of the cane that they did have, like a double whammy.
Exactly. Exactly. And it wasn't just bad luck either. It was a whole bunch of things happening at once, starting with a really bad monsoon season in 2023. When you don't have enough rain, it directly affects how well the sugarcane grows and how much sugar it contains.
Makes sense. So a bad monsoon basically messes with the main ingredient for sugar production. I'm guessing this is a pretty common problem for the industry, especially in areas that depend heavily on rain-fed agriculture.
Oh, yeah, it's a huge factor. And companies are always trying to find ways to deal with it, coming up with different strategies. But getting back to Tamil Nadu, on top of that bad monsoon, they also had to deal with some major pest problems, which, that just made things worse for the sugarcane crop.
Wow, it sounds like everything that could go wrong did go wrong for those companies.
It was definitely a tough situation, to say the least. And, it really highlights how vulnerable the sugar industry is to these external factors, especially the weather.
It really makes you think about how important those government policies are. They need to provide some stability, some support when these challenges pop up.
Absolutely. Government policies are crucial. And speaking of policies, let's go back to that ban on using sugarcane juice and B-heavy molasses for ethanol production.
Right. That policy shift, it had a big impact on the whole industry. The reports, they really emphasized how that decision hurt distillery profits, especially during that second quarter of fiscal year 2025.
Yeah, and it's important to keep in mind that a lot of these sugar companies, they've got these integrated operations. They're not just making sugar, they're producing ethanol too.
Right, it's all part of the same, value chain, I guess. So if you mess with one part of that chain, it can have a ripple effect on the whole operation.
Exactly. So when the government basically restricted the use of those byproducts for ethanol, it really threw a wrench in the system. Distilleries suddenly had fewer options for their feedstock, which led to lower production and, lower profits.
And it also shows just how sensitive this industry is to any changes in government regulations. Companies have to be ready to adapt, be flexible, if they want to navigate these changes and stay in business.
Adaptability is key, for sure. But, it's not always easy, especially when these policy changes seem to come out of nowhere. It can be really hard for companies to adjust their operations that quickly.
It makes you wonder about the long-term effects of these challenges. Will companies like eidparry be able to recover from these setbacks? Will the industry as a whole find ways to, become more resilient, deal with these unpredictable events?
Those are really good questions, and that's where things start to get really interesting. When you connect those individual company stories to the bigger picture, you start to see some trends emerge.
I love trends. What are you seeing?
Well, one thing that's really clear is this growing emphasis on diversification. We're seeing companies like BALRAMCHIN, they're exploring totally new things with their PLA project. And remember, Borkesh Sugar, they're diversifying the types of sugarcane they're planting.
It's like they're saying, okay, we're not going to put all our eggs in one basket anymore. They're spreading out the risk and looking for new opportunities, more stable ways to make money.
Exactly. They're realizing that just focusing on sugar production or on one single feedstock for their ethanol, it's just too risky in a market like this. By diversifying, they're making themselves more resilient. They're setting themselves up for success in the long run.
And that forward-thinking approach, that's got to be especially important with all the uncertainty around global prices and, the chance that policies might change again in the future.
Absolutely. It's about being proactive, anticipating those challenges and adjusting strategies to stay one step ahead. It's almost like it's like a Darwinian process of adaptation.
Survival of the fittest, sugar industry edition.
In a way, yeah. The companies that are best at adapting to these changing conditions, those are the ones that will thrive.
So with all of this going on, what does it mean for the people who are actually part of this industry? The consumers, the farmers, the companies themselves?
Well, for consumers, it means that, the price of sugar, how easy it is to find, even the price of ethanol, all of that can be affected by these complex things that are happening. For farmers, it means dealing with uncertainty in the prices they get for their sugarcane and how much they're able to grow.
And for the companies, it's like this constant balancing act. They have to manage risks, come up with new ideas, and try to stay ahead of the curve.
It's challenging, for sure, but it's also dynamic. It's an industry that's always evolving. And it brings up this really important question. How will all these different forces, the global trends, the decisions the government makes, even climate change, how will they shape the future of sugar in India?
That's a big question, and I don't think there are any easy answers. But one thing's for sure, the Indian sugar industry is on a pretty fascinating journey, and it's worth watching to see what happens. We've talked a lot about the challenges and how companies are adapting their strategies, but I'm curious about the bigger picture. Are there any signs that the industry as a whole might be on the verge of some kind of, transformation?
That's a great question. And actually, the reports do hint at some interesting possibilities. There are a few things happening at the same time that suggest the Indian sugar industry might be about to go through a major change. We're seeing that ethanol blending mandate pushing the industry in new directions, consumer preferences are changing, and there's a growing focus on sustainability, which is adding another layer of complexity.
Sounds like the industry is at a crossroads, facing these challenges, but there are also opportunities that could really reshape its future. This is getting exciting.
Oh, it is. And the path the industry chooses will have a big impact on everyone involved, from the farmers to the consumers to the companies themselves. Let's explore some of these potential transformations and see what the future might hold for the Indian sugar industry.
All right, so we've covered a ton of ground in this deep dive. We talked about the challenges, the impact of government policies, and those crazy global sugar prices. But I'm still really curious about those big transformations you mentioned, the ones that could totally reshape the industry.
Right, those are definitely worth exploring. Let's start with, the big one, the elephant in the room, the ethanol blending mandate. The government's targets are creating this huge surge in demand for ethanol, and that's really changing how the sugar industry works.
It's not just about producing sugar anymore.
Yeah.
It's about finding that balance between sugar and ethanol, figuring out how to maximize profits in this ever-changing market.
Exactly. And companies are having to make some tough choices. Do they invest a lot of money in expanding their ethanol production? Do they change how they plant sugarcane, maybe choosing varieties that are better for ethanol? These are big decisions, strategic choices that will affect them for years to come.
It's like they're playing this high-stakes chess game, trying to figure out what the next move is in this crazy market.
And the game's getting even more complicated with consumers, becoming more aware and changing their preferences. People are thinking about their health more these days. They're looking for alternatives to sugar.
Oh, yeah, I've totally noticed that. The supermarket, it's like there's a whole aisle dedicated to sugar substitutes now. Stevia, monk fruit, all those artificial sweeteners. It's a whole new world of sweet stuff.
It really is, and it's forcing sugar companies to get creative, diversify their products. They're exploring those alternatives, like you said, developing specialty sugars, even offering organic options to appeal to people who want natural, healthier choices.
So it's not just about surviving anymore. It's about evolving. Companies have to keep up with these changing demands, adapt to the new reality.
Exactly. And then you add sustainability into the mix and it gets even more complicated. Consumers are starting to think about how their choices affect the environment, and that includes the sugar they buy.
Yeah, that makes sense. Sugar production, it has a pretty big impact, right? All the water they use, the fertilizers, transporting it, it all adds up.
It does, and there's a lot of pressure on the industry to address these concerns. We're seeing more sustainable farming practices, mills trying to cut down on water usage, and even some exploring renewable energy to power their operations.
Was it like 3 major forces are reshaping the whole industry? Ethanol, consumer choices, and sustainability. They're all coming together to drive some big changes.
It's a pretty remarkable shift. And the companies that can handle these changes well, the ones that are open to new ideas and put sustainability first, those are going to be the leaders in this new era of the Indian sugar industry.
Sounds like the future of sugar in India is. Well, it's up in the air. But there are a lot of possibilities.
For sure. And what's really fascinating is that this transformation, it could have a much wider impact too. It could change India's agriculture, its energy policies, even its role in the global market.
This deep dive has been so eye-opening. I never thought something as basic as sugar could be so complex and connected to so many other things.
That's what I love about these deep dives. We take things for granted without realizing all the intricate systems and factors involved, and sugar is a perfect example of that.
So as we wrap things up here, what's the one thing you'd like our listeners to think about?
I think the biggest takeaway is this. Sugar might seem like a simple thing, a basic commodity, but it's actually woven into this incredibly complex web of interconnected systems. Global markets, government policies, the environment, what consumers want, it's all part of sugar's story. And if we want to make smart choices, both as shoppers and as citizens, we have to understand that complexity.
That's a really great point. It's a good reminder that even the simplest things can be surprisingly deep. And taking the time to explore that can lead to some really unexpected insights. So next time you're enjoying something sweet, think about everything that went into it, the challenges, the innovation, the impact it has on the world. It's a story worth appreciating.
Well said. And on that sweet note, I think we can conclude our deep dive into the Indian sugar industry.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. Until next time, stay curious, keep learning, and as always, stay sweet.